This is Jane Muncy again, telling bully borns I heard from my grandmother. Once there was 3 daughters, and their dad loved them very dearly, and he'd go to any expense to make them happy. One day he was rambling through an antique shop. They were rather rich, and he found a chair that had a sign over it that said, a wishing chair, and he went and asked the keeper of the shop what it meant. And they said, well, this chair, you can sit in it and rock 3 times and then make a wish and it'll come true. And he said, well, how much will you take for that chair? And they named the price, and he says, well, I want to buy it. So he bought it, and he took it home to his daughters, and there was one of his favorite daughters named Judy, and those were Sally and Kate. And he took it home to them, and they were out on the porch playing with it and making fun, and Kate sat down in the chair, and she rocked 3 times, and she says, I wish the most handsome man in the world would come and marry me tonight. And Sally says, well, I wish that the most ugly man in the world would come marry me tonight. And Judy says, sit down in it and rock 3 times. She says, I wish that Bully Bourne, the prize fighter, would come marry me tonight. And after she said that, well, they got up and went to play somewhere else. They were just young girls. And then it got dark about 6 o'clock, and the maid come and told Kate that someone wanted to see her, and it was the most handsome man in the world, and she had to marry him. So she married him, and then someone called for Sally, and it was the most ugly man in the world, and she had to marry him. And later on in the night, well, someone come and walked up the steps, and they began to think an earthquake had come. And he says, I want Judy. I want to marry her. And well, the father loved her better than anything, so he didn't want to give her up. So he said, well, here she is, and he pushed out the kitchen maid. He said, this isn't Judy. I want Judy. And so he says, if you don't give her to me, I'll tear your house down. And so her father was afraid that he might, so he pushed her out, and she married him. And he was mean to her, though, pretty mean to her. And the first little baby they had, he said, if anything happens to this baby and you cry, I'll leave you. And she said, well, I won't. So later on in the day, a big bulldog came in, and it snatched the baby out and ran out with it. And she began to cry and cry, and he came home from prize fighting, and he says, well, says, I made good today. What are you crying about? She said, well, an old bulldog come and took my baby off today. And he said, I told you not to cry. I said, I'll give you one more chance. I said, if you cry, I'll leave you. She said, well, I won't. So they had another little baby, though. They had 3 children, and the bulldog took the youngest off that day. And the next day, the oldest was sitting out on the porch, and she was out there rocking in the chair, and up come that big same bulldog and took it off. And she began to cry and cry, and he come home that night, and he said, well, I made good day. What are you crying about? She said, a big bulldog come and took our 2nd child off today. And she said, I'm crying over. He said, I told you that if you cried, I said I'd leave you. And she said, well, give me one more chance. And said, if anything happens to us, said, I won't cry. I said, I'll laugh about it if it'll make you happy. And well, that next day, she was out washing her clothes, and she had the baby laying on a pallet, and come the very same bulldog, and it snatched the baby away and ran off with it. Well, she was screaming for dear life because that bulldog took every one of her children off. And he came home, and he says, now what's the matter? And she says, well, says that very same bulldog came and took our oldest child off. And he said, well, I told you I was going to leave you. And so he packed his things, and he left. And she followed him. And she followed him until she came to his sister's house, and he went in her house, and she went in, and he came out, and she came out. And she followed him around that way for about 2 years, and then one day he was prize fighting, and he said he got a drop of blood on his shirt, and he said he tried to rub it out, and it wouldn't rub out. He said, I'll marry any woman who will get this drop of blood out. And the line of women was a long, long line. And this girl, his real wife, pushed her way up in front, and there was some old woman in front of her that had been trying for about 2 hours, and she had never got it done. And this girl says, now it's my turn, and she grabbed the shirt and she rubbed, and her first rub, it came out. And this other old woman grabbed it out of her hand and says, look here, Bully Barnes, I rubbed it out. You have to marry me. So he married her, and and they was in their house. They moved in their house, and she'd come see him every night. His real wife would, and she'd ask this girl if she could come in, and this woman said, no, said you can't come in. And then one night she come in and she said, can I see Bully Barnes? And she said, yes, I guess so, because that evening she'd give him a sleeping powder in his coffee. And she went in and she cried and screamed and hollered and tried to get him to wake up, but he wouldn't wake up. And the next evening was the same way, and the next evening the same way. And the evening before that she didn't come. Evening after that she didn't come. And there was an old man was talking to Bully Barnes, and he says, I wish that you didn't sleep so sound. I said, you rent that room to me next door to you, and said, I hear everything that goes on in your room. He said, there's a woman comes there and cries and screams every night, tries to get you to wake up. And he said, well, I'll see about it tonight. Said, I won't drink anything or eat anything. So he didn't drink anything or eat anything, and she gave him his coffee, and he told her he didn't want it. She tried to force it down him, and he poured it down his shirt. And he didn't drink it. So that night he pretended like he was asleep, and this girl came in, and she says, Bully Barnes, are you awake? And he says, yes. And she says, I rubbed that drop of blood out, and he says, you did. So he took her and married her, and they went and got their 3 children, and married her again, and they went and got their 3 children, and they're happy ever after.